This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome to Nature Back to Rob. It's the second time I'm welcoming you here.
Yeah, thanks, Tama, and nice to have met you in person in between the two recordings.
The native. What is native?
Right, so native helps you protect and restore rainforests, mangroves, and coral reefs while supporting indigenous guardians. So that's a very important part of our approach. We provide a map so you can see every single square you buy, and you receive live updates as communities take action to protect these natural assets for generations. We also give you a dashboard so you can track your impact across carbon, biodiversity, and community, and share it to socials to inspire others to join you.
And it was born from what idea exactly?
So it's essentially born out of the idea that we believe that one of the biggest levers we have to address the climate crisis is basically companies' marketing budgets. But also the idea that actually there's a huge amount of untapped potential in carbon markets. The way they've been designed, apart from having a lot of really poor conservation outcomes and sort of unintended consequences, they also don't inspire and engage the general public. That actually maybe ahead of sustainability, the large company cares about tons of carbon, but people don't care about tons of carbon. They don't know what it is. They can't smell it. They can't touch it. They can't visualize it. But a square of rainforest or mangroves is something that inspires wonder and evokes action. So it's that kind of insight. How can we harness that to do something that's fairer, more transparent, but actually can achieve more good at scale? And here it is on the map. You can see it for yourself. You don't have to trust some third party.
But I think the dilemma of fixing the carbon kind of narrative is just so big thing to tackle as a young company. Every single big company is speaking about it. Every single big company has put millions on marketing this story. How do you go with such a? It's not David and Goliath. It's much bigger kind of discrepancy.
Yeah, we do like to fight off the big challenges, don't we? So, yes, a lot of companies are looking at this area. There's a lot of money pouring in. They're expected to grow sort of 100x in the next sort of 20, 30 years. I think there's a huge amount of what corporates often do, which is they're all quite cautious and they end up echoing each other. I read a sort of LinkedIn article from some head of sustainability at some large corporate, and it's just they're just carefully parroting what all the other companies are saying because they don't want to stick out too much and they want to make sure they're ticking all the boxes. And I think that approach has sort of groupthinked us into a really, really poorly thought out version of what companies paying to protect nature could be. And in fact, I would say, although, yes, they're pouring a lot of money in it, they're talking about it a lot, everyone in the space, everyone in and around carbon markets is kind of scratching their head and looking for a version 2.0 because of the fact there have been so many scandals, so many reports of abuses. The recent Guardian article has really shaken things up. So yes, there's a lot of groupthink, but there's also a huge window, I think, to come along and do things differently. And when you actually speak to experts in this field, and I speak to them a lot, they're all like, yep, what you're saying is bang on the money. We absolutely need something like that. And you guys are way ahead of the game. So in a sense, we're trying to educate the market, but in the same sense, the wind is with us, so to speak.
The carbon market needs the version 2.0. Somebody in one of the recent episodes was suggesting that the version 2.0 for the carbon market should be the biodiversity credits market, which could be done very much in a similar way as carbon market, which of course leads to the challenge that how then the outcome would be different if it's done the same way.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, huge fan of this evolving space. I think we need something like biodiversity markets. Essentially, our contention is that if you try and reduce rainforest or mangroves or coral reefs to units, if you reduce them to so many tons of carbon or so many biodiversity net gain credits, you're still doing this kind of act of violent reductionism where you're going to end up, if you're optimizing for this one metric at the expense of the whole, then you're going to end up with perverse unintended consequences one way or another, right? Mm-hmm. And so our response to that is to say, hey, let's not do that. A rainforest is carbon, but it's also biodiversity and it's also community. And yes, we actually have to admit at the outset that we can never actually perfectly accurately value these places. It's always going to be an approximation. But let's at least do it with an attempt to try and be a bit more holistic, not reduce it to one or other metric, but to actually value and price these 3 by 3 meter squares according to 3 metrics: carbon, biodiversity, and community. And by doing that, not only can we hopefully avoid some of those pitfalls that we see playing out all the time, but we can actually help companies address 3 kinds of ESG metric with a single product. And when you ask people how much that's going to cost, a square of rainforest, most people think tens of thousands of dollars, because to individuals it's worth a lot. But about $10 is comfortably enough to outbid a logging company, for example. Hopefully, by the time this podcast is out, this episode is out, our MVP will be live and running. You can literally go to nativeearth.io and you can buy a 3 by 3 meter square. As I say, we'll give you scores for carbon, biodiversity, and community impact. And as the community takes action on the ground, whether it's forest ranger programs or building schools or building medical centers, your dashboard will populate with the SDGs as they're being met.
I mean, what's the sales argument?
The sales argument for individuals or the sales argument for companies?
I think I would assume the bigger volume could be coming from the companies, but I could be wrong, and the idea of kind of the sales arguments are probably very different.
Yeah, so I think, as I touched on before, I think there's an enormous gap because everyone is focused on large corporates and they're operating in this kind of echo chamber. There's a missed opportunity, right? That actually people on the street, if they know that it's only $10, would be quite willing to spend money on that, particularly if they can see it and they can engage with it and they can track it. So we are actually going to take kind of B2C route to begin with, and we're going to also focus on SMEs, small startups, small sustainable businesses that, again, I think also get left out because of the way markets are designed. But eventually the aim is to go towards large corporates. I mean, the main sort of selling point is, number one, we help you avoid greenwashing claims, because a ton of carbon is very hard to track and monitor, and you get all these issues like double counting or rainforest being lost and then moving tons around, this kind of thing. Whereas it's where rainforest is visible, you can see it on our map, and no one can really bullshit you if it's not there. So that allows us to provide a lot more transparency. The other one is that we, as I say, we allow you to address 3 different kinds of ESG metrics with a single product. And the third one is that we give 90% of the money to Indigenous guardians. And that's far more than any other product you'll find on the market. And there's an awful lot of kind of emerging scholarship and understanding, even in the corporate space, that Indigenous guardians are hugely important to the reversing the climate and biodiversity crisis. And any solution which doesn't put them at the center is likely to fail, or at the very best just overlook some very important aspects of what it means to sustainably manage a forest. So I think we're way ahead of the curve on those 3 things, and companies that are willing to kind of try something a bit new will also join us, and will be down the line in not a very short amount of time. It'll become clear that this is the way to go.
The classical, how would I say, Western capitalist thought is, of course, the who owns this 3x3 squares? With $10, probably you buy protection financing, or what do you actually buy?
Yeah, so it's hugely important to us that Indigenous guardians have land ownership and land rights. And by the way, even when there's no carbon project running, Indigenous guardians outperform national parks in terms of nature protection. So that's just how effective they are. So it's very important that they have land ownership rights. That's why they get 90% of the money that you spend with us. So you're not buying the title to the land. You are paying to protect it in the case of existing natural assets, or restore it if they're degraded. We've got two mangrove restoration projects on it at the moment. And you basically are paying to protect or restore those ecosystem services and claim them as impact, whether you're an individual or a company. But the land rights will always remain with the Indigenous people.
The $10, how long does it last? Is it 1 year?
40 years.
40 years.
40 years is the guidance coming from the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets. The understanding and indeed the legal documents that we sign with the communities will say that they have an obligation to protect natural assets in perpetuity. But some of the conversations around permanence in carbon markets we think are really unrealistic, and they end up favouring technology-based reductions, where it's much easier to say, this ton of carbon will be locked up forever. Whereas with a forest that's complex, and there's all these different factors and people living there, it's harder to say. So we end up massively discounting the value of natural assets. So we were quite keen not to go down that route. But we've done a kind of happy middle by following, the best guidance on this and protecting it for years. That does, of course, mean that some of that 90% needs to be providing an income over time. So 10 of the 10% will go into a fund which will provide an income to the communities over time, so that there's an incentive for future generations to continue the work of their parents who maybe signed the agreement in the first place.
What's the scale at launch? You mentioned that there are two first mangrove restoration projects, but you basically work always with some specific project or some specific indigenous rights groups which have a right to some land, or is it very much project-based in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the situation on the ground in each of these projects is so different and nuanced that you really have to, be very kind of sensitive and adaptable. We have signed an MOU for 60,000 hectares of rainforest in the Pacific. And so that will be the first project that we bring to market. And we've got very good ties there with local, regional and national government as well, which is very important in these projects. So that will be our first project. As I mentioned, we've got a couple of mangrove restoration projects running as well in Tanzania and Philippines. They're quite small; they're in the tens of hectares, but they will scale as we sell squared.
How far the launch or the silent launch or the soft launch is from today?
I would say it's about a month away. We're doing a redesign of the website. And we're still gathering data from the communities in order to actually, populate the map and these squares with the data we need. But I would say we're a month or 2 months out.
What's the growth plan? I mean, how do you plan to grow it from the first 60,000 hectares and first, podcast episodes where you speak about it?
Well, we've got a very, very strong media and marketing team. Our sort of head of media, Jamie, he's sort of chief commercial officer, but he's won Cannes and Berlin Film Festival. So we're going with quite a strong media-led approach. We're making a film for our first client, who's Ginger Bees, a sustainable activewear brand. We're making a film with them, which will go to various film festivals, and we can piggyback off the publicity for that. Jamie's very good at scooping awards for these kinds of films. So that's kind of one route. The other one is we've got a very strong viral marketing team headed up by Jasper Wilkins. And he's very good at direct B2C, like individual engagement across sort of TikTok and Reels and those kinds of formats. So we're going to go quite hard after that sort of retail segment of the market to begin with, and then leverage partnerships with SMEs like Ginger Bees that have great sort of stories and marketing behind them. We're also speaking to Maving Bikes in the UK that make electric bikes, and Manulife Peanut Butter. Those discussions are fairly early, but those are the kind of brands we'd be looking to partner with because they're very cool. They have a great sustainability ethos. They have strong communities behind them. They have great marketing, and the idea is that we partner with them and we do a really good job of showing the wider sector what we can do for these brands. And then use that to kind of, ratchet up the size of companies that we work with.
And also probably this $10 price point is a nice, I don't know, monthly subscription of Netflix, or for the older generation, the CD they bought from the shop, or what, it's kind of not such a big and heavy thought of the pricing.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it exactly depends on your frame of reference. I mean, nowadays it's pretty much the price of a pint of beer in London. So that makes it increasingly hard to justify your next pint if I'm not protecting any rainforest. But yeah, the $10 figure is a guide price. The idea, and this is also fairly novel in our approach, is that rather than a ton of carbon being, the sort of point of that kind of being discovered by the market.
Yeah.
The price of each square will actually be determined by the scores for carbon, biodiversity, and community. Mm-hmm. So, and they might even fluctuate over time, right? You might have a running project and there are some unsold squares. And guess what? They managed to actually photograph a rare bird, or they managed to have completed the school that was under construction for local Indigenous children. And so that might actually increase the biodiversity score and the price, or increase the community score and the price. So there's also a kind of a mechanism whereby it incentivizes people to get in at the beginning of a project, buy squares, and possibly trade them later.
Okay. So there will be a secondary market for the squares or protection tokens, or whatever you call them.
Yeah, we batted this around a bit because obviously the in worst case scenarios, this just becomes a kind of financial speculative mechanism. A load of Western financial institutions pile in and flip these tons of carbon and make, many times over. So we have realized that it's an important part of making the market function, but we've also built in a secondary market fee of 8%, and 5 of that 8 will go to the Indigenous Guardians in order to continue giving them revenue. So that they benefit from any upside in secondary market trades.
Like NFTs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's another conversation we had. In the end, we feel that mandating all these squares as in making sure that companies have to buy them as NFTs was just an extra barrier that wasn't really necessary. But we are going to give buyers the option of minting their squares as an NFT. And that could be tradable as well. But we'll come up with some nice kind of analog things as well, like a nice certificate that you can have on your wall behind your desk saying, we've protected this many squares and here's the picture of them on the map and here are our scores for carbon, etc.
Or a company putting it on their website to show that we are protecting the squares in this part of the world and this part of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, we imagine that, the native brand will eventually become a kind of stamp of approval in that sense, and like another mark that you can have on your website.
But that, in a way, that's probably kind of long game. You kind of need to build trust in the logical alternative to the CO2 tons we saved with or saved or compensated or, whatever. Yeah,
precisely. And that, that there is like a lot of reputation and trust and credibility building that needs to happen. Unfortunately, carbon markets, like most new markets, to be honest, when they evolve, the first people to jump on, or a lot of the initial people to jump on, are a bit cynical and money grabbing. So there has been a lot of damage done, and in fact, a lot of sort of your average people on the street just hear kind of carbon markets or carbon credits or carbon neutral, and they just think like, oh, isn't this just a whole load of bullshit? But then the very same people, if you say to them, do you think companies should pay to protect rainforests? They'll be like, yeah, absolutely. So they're against the execution. They're not against the actual concept. It's just about doing it in the right way and doing it with integrity.
I couldn't agree more on that one. I think we will be here on the sidelines watching and going to a website when you launch. Sounds like a really fascinating project, and we'll try to time the publishing of this episode as close as possible to your actual launch, so it would make the most sense. Thanks for joining us, Robert, for this discussion.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tamo. Always enjoy chatting to you and really appreciate your support.
If you like the show, subscribe and leave a good rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It would mean a world to us.
For those of you who dream of a world where music and podcasts live together in perfect harmony, now, for the first time, Electricast gives you a magical compilation, Pod Till You Drop, Volume 1, where we give you the best in tunes and the best in podcasts. Feast your ears and hear the culture. Available now wherever you listen to music. Electricast.
Hi, I'm Geraldine Glass, and I'm excited to share a new healing music offering, an extended version song called Joy Reboot, a unique fusion of pop, classic, rap, soundscapes, and funk to inspire collaboration and bring unity through sound. For us, Joy Reboot is music medicine, out now with Electricast Records.
Electricast.